The message arrived at Earth's diplomatic command at 0600 hours, and Ambassador Lisa Monroe read it 3 times before she believed what she was seeing. Standing in her office overlooking the Geneva skyline with her coffee growing cold in her hand as the weight of the words settled over her like a heavy blanket. The Calvaran Empire, rulers of 200 star systems and self-proclaimed masters of the Galactic West, had just issued an ultimatum that would change everything. She forwarded the message to Admiral Greg Patterson at Fleet Command and to General Kyle Morrison at Earth Defense Force Headquarters, then began preparing for the emergency session that would certainly follow. Within the hour, she was proven right, as every major government leader on Earth joined the virtual conference, their faces ranging from shocked to furious as they absorbed the Empire's demands. The ultimatum was simple and insulting in equal measure. Earth would surrender all 12 of its colony worlds, submit to Calvaran governance, pay tribute of resources and technology, and accept Imperial observers in all human governments within 30 standard days. Failure to comply would result in military action to enforce compliance. As the message stated with cold bureaucratic precision, "They cannot be serious," said President Chun of the Pacific Alliance, his voice tight with barely controlled anger as he leaned forward in his chair. "We have been part of the Galactic Assembly for only 15 years and have violated no treaties or laws." Ambassador Monroe nodded, her expression grim as she pulled up additional data on her screen. "They are very serious, and according to my contacts in the Assembly, Emperor Vex Ver himself authored this ultimatum. He gave a speech to the Calvaran Senate 3 days ago, calling humanity a plague of primitives that needed to be brought to heel before we spread further." Admiral Patterson spoke up from his command center, his gray hair and steady gaze familiar to everyone in the conference. "Our intelligence suggests the Calvaran military has been mobilizing for 6 months. They have assembled a fleet of over 300 warships in the Sector 9 staging area, while within striking distance of our outer colonies." General Morrison pulled up tactical displays that appeared in everyone's view, showing the distribution of human forces across their small sphere of controlled space. "We have 42 capital ships, 160 destroyers and frigates, and defensive installations on each colony world. We are outnumbered, but not defenseless." The discussions continued for hours as Earth's leaders debated their options, some arguing for negotiation and others for immediate military preparation. Ambassador Monroe listened to all sides before she made her recommendation, speaking with the calm authority that had served her well in dozens of diplomatic crises. "We should attend the Galactic Assembly session scheduled for tomorrow and make our case to the other species," she said, her voice cutting through the arguing voices. "Many of them have been watching our development with interest, and some with friendship. They may pressure the Calvarans to back down." It was agreed, though Admiral Patterson requested and received permission to begin defensive preparations immediately, his years of military experience telling him that hope was not a strategy. As the conference ended, he turned to his staff and began issuing orders that would put the entire fleet on high alert. The next day, Ambassador Monroe stood in the great chamber of the Galactic Assembly, a massive space station that orbited a neutral star system and served as the meeting place for 47 different species. She wore her formal diplomatic uniform and carried humanity's case in a data crystal that held evidence of Earth's peaceful intentions and lawful expansion. Emperor Vexfer was already speaking when she arrived, his tall reptilian form commanding attention from the circular platform at the chamber center. His scales gleamed purple and black under the lights as he gestured with his 4 arms, each movement calculated for maximum dramatic effect. The humans claimed to seek peace, but they breathe like vermin and expand with reckless speed, he declared, his voice amplified to fill the enormous space. In a mere 15 years, they have claimed 12 worlds and shown no signs of slowing. If we do not act now, in 50 years, they will dominate this entire sector. Ambassador Monroe waited for her turn to speak, watching as several species nodded in agreement while others looked uncomfortable. She recognized the delegate from the Arxian Collective, a species that had traded peacefully with Earth for a decade, and saw concern in their large eyes. When her time came, she stepped onto the platform and began her presentation, showing Earth's population growth rates, which were actually quite modest by galactic standards, demonstrating the careful ecological surveys conducted before each colony was established, and presenting the trade agreements and cultural exchanges that humanity had pursued with 20 different species. "We come from a world that taught us the value of cooperation," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Earth has known terrible wars, yes, but we learned from them and built a unified government dedicated to peaceful exploration. We ask only for the same rights granted to every other species here, the right to grow and prosper without threat of conquest." Emperor Dexfer laughed, the sound harsh and mocking in the quiet chamber. "You speak of peace, but I see your military buildup. You speak of cooperation, but you refuse our generous offer of imperial protection. The Calvoran Empire has maintained order in 200 systems for 3,000 years, and we will not be lectured by children from a backwater world." He turned to address the full assembly, his voice rising with righteous conviction. "I call for a vote to authorize Calvoran enforcement action against the human colonies. Let the Assembly recognize our right to maintain order and security in our traditional sphere of influence." The vote was called, and Ambassador Monroe watched with sinking heart as species after species abstained, unwilling to challenge the powerful empire over a newcomer species they barely knew. Only the Arxians and 3 other smaller species voted against the measure, while the Calvorans and their client states voted in favor. The authorization passed, and Emperor Dexver looked directly at Ambassador Monroe with something like pity in his ancient eyes. "Return to your world and tell your leaders they have wasted their chance for peaceful submission. The Empire moves to war, and your primitive forces will be swept aside like dust before wind. We have crushed 100 rebellions and conquered 50 species. What makes you think you will be any different?" Ambassador Monroe met his gaze without flinching, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber as she delivered her response. "You should have studied our history more carefully, Emperor. Every species you conquered was unprepared for war because they had known centuries of peace. But Earth has never known such luxury. We unified our world only after nearly destroying it, and we remember every lesson learned in blood." She left the chamber with dignity intact but hope fading, knowing that war was now inevitable. By the time she returned to Earth, the Calvoran fleet had already begun moving toward human space, and Admiral Patterson had recalled every ship to defensive positions. General Morrison addressed the combined military command in a secure bunker deep beneath Geneva, his voice grim but determined as he outlined the situation. "The Calvorans are coming with overwhelming force, and they expect easy victory. Our job is to make them pay for every meter of space, every colony world, every ship they take. We make this so costly that they will think twice before pushing further." Admiral Patterson stood beside him, reviewing the deployment orders that would send the fleet to meet the coming storm. "We have one advantage they do not expect. Humans have been fighting wars for our entire history, and we have learned how to win against superior numbers. We adapt, we improvise, and we never give up." Across Earth and its colonies, reservists were called up, and civilian volunteers flooded recruitment centers. Factories that had been making cargo haulers retooled to produce weapons and ammunition. Defensive installations that had been mothballed were brought back online, and staffed with crews who trained around the clock. The Calvoran Empire had declared war expecting submission, and instead, they awakened something they did not understand. Humanity had climbed to the top of Earth's food chain by being the most Dangerous predator on a planet full of things that wanted to kill them. And now an empire built on easy conquests was about to learn what it meant to fight a species born from a death world. First Calvoran fleet, 50 warships strong, entered human space 3 weeks after the ultimatum expired and set course for Proxima Station, the outermost human settlement. They expected to find frightened colonists ready to surrender, but instead, they found Captain Jacob Rivers and the crew of the EDF Valiant waiting with weapons armed and shields at maximum. The war had begun, and neither side yet understood how it would end. But in command centers across Earth and her colonies, human commanders smiled cold smiles and prepared to teach the Empire a lesson they would never forget. The Calvorans thought they were hunting prey, but they were about to discover they had started a fight with predators. Captain Jacob Rivers stood on the bridge of the EDF Valiant and watched the Calvoran fleet approach on his tactical display. 50 massive warships moving in perfect formation like they were on parade rather than heading into battle. He had been in command of this destroyer for 3 years and had never expected to use her weapons in anger. But here he was about to face an enemy that outnumbered his single ship 50 to 1. All civilian transports have cleared the station, sir, reported Lieutenant Sarah Banks from her tactical station, her fingers moving quickly across her console as she managed the evacuation. Last shuttle just docked with the colony ship Meridian, and they are jumping to hyperspace now. Jacob nodded, watching the civilian vessels vanish from his screens as they fled to safety deeper in human space. Carrying 15,000 colonists who had built lives on Proxima Station over the past 8 years. The station itself was a sprawling complex of habitation modules, hydroponics bays, and mining facilities that orbited a resource-rich asteroid. Valuable enough that the Calvorans wanted it intact. Communications. Open a channel to the Calvoran fleet, he ordered, settling back in his command chair as he prepared to buy his people more time. The main view screen flickered and Commander Velther appeared, his reptilian features showing mild curiosity as he examined the human captain. The Calvoran officer wore elaborate armor, decorated with medals from a dozen conquered worlds, and carried himself with the supreme confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Human vessel, you will power down your weapons and surrender your station immediately, Velther said, his translator rendering his words in flat, emotionless tones. Compliance will be noted in your file and may result in favorable treatment when Earth submits to Imperial authority. Jacob smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes as he leaned forward. Commander Velther, I am Captain Jacob Rivers of the Earth Defense Force, and I am authorized to inform you that Proxima Station is sovereign human territory. Your presence here constitutes an act of war, and you are ordered to withdraw immediately. Velther's expression shifted to something between amusement and disbelief. Captain, I command 50 warships of the Calvoran Third Fleet. You have one small destroyer that my flagship could destroy with a single broadside. Do you really intend to fight? I intend to defend my post, Commander, Jacob replied calmly. You want this station, you will have to take it. And I promise you that will not be as easy as you think. The channel closed, and Jacob turned to his crew, seeing fear in some faces but determination in all of them. Everyone knows the plan. We are not here to win. We are here to make them bleed for every meter of space. Tactical. Begin deployment of the welcome gifts. Lieutenant Sarah Banks grinned as she activated the systems they had been preparing for the past 2 weeks, releasing hundreds of small objects from the Valiant's cargo base. To Calvoran sensors, they would appear as debris or perhaps escape pods. Harmless clutter in the space around the station. The Calvoran fleet advanced with textbook precision, their formation designed to bring maximum firepower to bear while protecting their larger vessels with screens of smaller escorts. Commander Velthor clearly expected the human ship to flee or surrender as they closed to weapons range. Instead, the Valiant launched every missile she had in a single devastating volley. 200 guided warheads screaming toward the Calvoran formation at near light speed. The enemy point defense systems engaged immediately, destroying most of the missiles in brilliant flashes of light. The 12 made it through and slammed into shields and armor with thunderous impacts. Direct hits on 4 escort vessels, Sarah reported, her voice tight with concentration. Enemy shields holding, but we damaged their sensor arrays. They are launching fighters. Jacob watched as swarms of Calvoran strike craft poured from their carriers. Elegant dart-shaped vessels that moved with incredible speed and agility. The Empire had been building warships for 3,000 years, and their technology was refined to deadly perfection. Activate the gifts, he ordered quietly. The debris field around them suddenly came alive as hundreds of autonomous minds activated. Their simple AI cores identifying the Calvoran fighters and accelerating toward them on chemical rockets. The mines were crewed by galactic standards, little more than shaped charges with basic guidance systems. But humans had been building improvised weapons since they lived in caves, and these were very effective. Explosions rippled through the fighter formations as mines detonated in clusters. Their fragmentation patterns designed by Earth's best weapons engineers to maximize damage. The Calvorans lost 40 fighters in the first 30 seconds, and their neat formations dissolved into chaos as pilots tried to evade the unexpected threat. Enemy fleet breaking formation, Sarah called out, her voice rising with excitement. They did not expect resistance like this. Commander Velthor's face reappeared on the screen, his expression no longer showing amusement. You use dishonorable weapons, Captain. Mines and traps are the tools of cowards. We use effective weapons. Commander, Jacob replied, already ordering the Valiant to change position. On Earth we have a saying, all's fair in love and war. You want to play by rules, but we fight to win. The Calvoran fleet regrouped and began a more cautious advance. Their point defense systems now actively hunting for mines while their remaining fighters provided screening. They had learned to respect the human ship, but they still had overwhelming numbers. Jacob led them on a running battle through the asteroid field, using the massive rocks for cover as he fired railgun rounds and lasers at any target that presented itself. The Valiant was fast and maneuverable, designed for hit-and-run tactics against larger opponents. And her crew had trained for exactly this scenario. Lieutenant Sarah Banks coordinated their defensive fire with cold precision, managing power distribution between shields, weapons, and engines with the skill of someone who had aced every simulation at the Academy. She called out targets and damage reports in a steady stream while her fingers danced across her console. They destroyed 3 Calvoran escort ships and damaged twice that many before the enemy began to adapt, spreading their formation wider to reduce the effectiveness of the mines and bringing their superior firepower to bear from multiple angles. The Valiant's shields took hit after hit, the energy levels dropping steadily as the vessel shuddered under the impacts. Shields at 30%, Sarah reported, her voice still calm despite the violence around them. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7. Damage control teams responding. Jacob knew they could not last much longer, but they had achieved their mission, delaying the Calvoran advance by 6 hours and destroying or damaging 20 enemy vessels. More importantly, they had sent a message that would echo through the fleet and back to the Empire. All hands, prepare to abandon ship, he ordered, hating the words but knowing they had no choice. Sarah, set the reactor for overload on my command. Engineering, load our core data into the escape pods. The Valiant continued fighting as her crew evacuated, the automated systems maintaining fire even as people rushed to the escape pods. When the last crew member was clear, Jacob set the overload sequence and ran for his own pod. Feeling the ship shake around him as Calvarn weapons tore through the failing shields, he launched just as the reactor went critical. The Valiant transforming into a miniature sun that consumed everything within a kilometer. 2 more Calvarn ships died in that blast, caught too close as they moved in for the kill from his escape pod. Jacob watched as the Calvarns finally reached Proxima Station and began boarding operations. They would take the station, but they had paid a price far higher than they expected, losing 15 ships and over 3,000 crew to a single. Human destroyer Commander Velther's face appeared on the emergency channel that connected to the escape pods, his expression showing something new. Something that might have been respect or might have been the first touch of fear. "You fought well, Captain Rivers. The Empire will remember this battle. So will Earth," Jacob replied, watching as recovery ships moved to collect the escape pods. "And I promise you, Commander, every battle from here will be harder. You thought you were fighting primitives, but you have started a war with survivors from a death world. And we do not know how to quit." The pods were collected and the surviving crew of the Valiant were taken prisoner. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. Across human space, every military commander watched the battle recordings and learned from them. Adapting tactics and strategies to match the Calvarn threat, Admiral Patterson reviewed the data in his command center on Earth, his expression grim but satisfied as he analyzed the engagement. "Captain Rivers showed us their weaknesses. They expect conventional warfare, and they are not prepared for our creativity. Pass this to all fleet commanders and tell them to develop their own surprises." General Morrison stood beside him, watching as production reports scrolled across another screen, showing factories working at maximum capacity to build more ships, more weapons, more of everything they would need for a long war. The Calvarns think they won because they took the station, but they lost this battle. They learned that fighting humans means paying in blood. The news spread through the Empire as well, carried by officers who had witnessed the ferocity of human resistance. Field Marshal Krex commanded the Calvarn ground forces with the confidence of someone who had conquered 20 worlds, watching from his command ship as his troops prepared to land on New Terra, the largest and most developed of Earth's colony worlds. Intelligence reports indicated a population of 3 million humans living in 5 major cities spread across 2 continents. And he expected resistance to collapse within days once his veteran soldiers established control. Dr. Helen Cotter stood in the Galactic Assembly's observation gallery, her credentials as Earth's leading xenobiologist granting her access to address the Council. She had spent the past week preparing a presentation that she hoped would make the other species understand what the Calvarns were really facing, though she doubted it would change anything now that the war had started on New Terra. Private Danny Brooks crouched in a fighting position overlooking the main landing zone, his rifle loaded and his squad spread out in carefully prepared defensive positions. He was 20 years old and had joined the Colonial Defense Force, expecting to spend his service doing disaster relief and rescue operations. But now he was about to face the most powerful military in the galaxy. The Calvarn troop ships descended through New Terra's atmosphere in massive formations, their shields glowing as they pushed through the air at speeds that created sonic booms across the continent. Field Marshal Krex watched the landing with satisfaction, seeing his forces deploy with the precision that came from centuries of military tradition. What he did not see was the thousands of small details that made New Terra fundamentally different from every world the Empire had conquered before. The gravity was slightly higher than Calvarn's standard, not enough to be immediately obvious, but enough to make his troops tire faster. The atmosphere had higher oxygen content that would make fires burn hotter and longer. The local bacteria were harmless to humans, but would cause respiratory infections in Calvarns within days. Private Danny Brooks waited until the first wave of Calvoran troops were on the ground and forming up before he opened fire. His squad adding their weapons to the coordinated ambush that caught the enemy in a crossfire. The Calvorans had better armor and shields than human infantry, but they moved slowly in the heavier gravity, and their formations were designed for open warfare rather than the guerrilla tactics the humans employed. Fall back to secondary positions, Danny's sergeant ordered after they had inflicted casualties and disrupted the enemy formation. Make them chase us into the industrial district. The human defenders retreated in good order, leading the Calvorans into urban terrain where their numerical advantage was reduced and their heavy weapons were less effective. The industrial district was a maze of factories, warehouses, and refineries that the humans knew intimately and had prepared for exactly this kind of fighting. Field Marshal Krex frowned as he received reports of his advance bogging down in street-to-street combat, his soldiers taking casualties from snipers, booby traps, and ambushes that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He had expected to take the first city in hours, but already a full day had passed and his forces controlled less than a third of the urban area. Bring up the heavy armor and level the buildings where resistance is strongest, he ordered. Falling back on the tactics that had worked on other worlds, the Calvoran war machines rumbled forward. Massive tanks and walkers that towered over the buildings and mounted weapons powerful enough to reduce structures to rubble. They began systematically destroying any building that showed signs of occupation, their doctrine prioritizing shock and awe over precision. Danny Brooks watched from a concealed position as his neighborhood was demolished, feeling rage build in his chest as homes and schools and shops were turned to debris. The Calvorans were fighting like they always fought, using overwhelming force to break the enemy's will. But they did not understand that humans did not break easily. They want to play rough, his sergeant said quietly, activating a remote detonator. Let's show them what rough looks like. The industrial complex erupted in a series of massive explosions as humans detonated stockpiles of chemicals and fuel they had positioned throughout the district. The blasts were not nuclear, but they were devastating, creating fireballs that consumed Calvoran armor in the high oxygen atmosphere and sending shockwaves that collapsed buildings onto enemy positions. Field Marshal Krex watched in horror as he lost an entire mechanized battalion in seconds, the flames spreading through his formations faster than his troops could retreat. The humans had turned their own infrastructure into weapons and shown a willingness to destroy their cities, rather than let them fall intact across the galaxy. Dr. Helen Carter began her presentation to the Galactic Assembly, displaying images of Earth on the main screen. She showed them oceans that covered 70% of the surface, weather systems that could spawn hurricanes with winds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour, and tectonic activity that regularly shook entire continents. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world, she explained, her voice carrying to every delegate in the chamber. To put that in perspective, the average garden world where most of you evolved is Class 2 or 3. Earth is megafauna that can kill an unprotected human in seconds. Diseases that have driven our evolution for millions of years, and environmental conditions that would be lethal to most species here. She showed footage of Earth's wildlife: great white sharks, saltwater crocodiles, polar bears, venomous snakes and spiders, and swarms of insects that could strip flesh from bone. The assembled delegates watched with growing unease as they realized humans had evolved alongside predators that would terrify most galactic species. Human beings have 1.0 gravities as our standard, which is 30% higher than the galactic average, Dr. Carter continued, pulling up comparative data. We process oxygen at rates that would be toxic to most species. We can survive temperature ranges from -40 to +50 degrees Celsius. We heal from injuries that would be fatal to others, and our immune systems fight off pathogens constantly. The Arxian delegate raised a manipulator appendage, their large eyes showing concern. Dr. Carter, are you saying that humans are naturally more dangerous than other species? Helen chose her words carefully, knowing that fear could be as dangerous as ignorance. I am saying that humans evolved in an environment that demanded physical and mental resilience. We are not stronger or faster than many species, but we are incredibly adaptable, and we do not give up easily when threatened. She displayed historical records next. Images and data from Earth's conflicts that made several delegates look away in discomfort. The trenches of the First World War, where millions died in conditions that resembled hell. The atomic bombings that ended the Second World War. The countless smaller conflicts that had raged across every continent. Humanity spent most of its history fighting itself. She said quietly, "We developed weapons capable of destroying our entire planet and came terrifyingly close to using them. The only reason we survived to reach the stars is that we learned slowly and painfully. That cooperation was better than extinction." Emperor Dexver's representative stood and spoke with disdain. This presentation changes nothing. The Empire has faced dangerous species before and conquered them all. Humanity's violent history only proves they are barbaric and need imperial guidance. Helen met the representative's gaze steadily. You missed the point. We are not barbaric, we are survivors, and there is a difference. Barbarians fight without thinking, but survivors fight with every advantage they can find. Every trick they can devise, every weapon they can create. Because losing means death. Back on New Terra, the battle continued to rage as Field Marshal Krex threw more forces into the meat grinder of urban combat. His troops were brave and well-trained, but they were not prepared for an enemy that used suicide drones, collapsed buildings as weapons, and fought with a ferocity that seemed to increase as casualties mounted private. Danny Brooks and his squad held a ruined factory complex against repeated Calvaran assaults, using the rubble as fortifications and the machinery as improvised weapons. They had been fighting for 3 days with minimal sleep and dwindling ammunition. But none of them suggested retreat. They are grinding us down, one of his squadmates said during a brief lull. Reloading his rifle with hands that shook from exhaustion, Danny nodded, sipping water from his canteen and checking his remaining ammunition. Yeah, but we are grinding them down too, and we are on our home ground. Every hour we hold here is another hour for reinforcements to arrive, and for command to plan the counterattack. The sergeant crawled over to their position, his armor scorched and dented from multiple hits. Word from command. General Morrison is moving the 5th Fleet into position for orbital support. We just need to hold until tomorrow and we will have fire support. They held through the night, fighting off 3 more assaults as Calvaran forces tried to break through their position. By dawn, Danny's squad was down to half strength and nearly out of ammunition. But they were still in position when the sky lit up with the trails of orbital strikes. General Kyle Morrison coordinated the counterattack from his flagship in orbit, watching as human forces that had been quietly maneuvering into position for days out. 6 months into the war, Commander Rachel Griffin stood on the bridge of the EDF Retribution and studied the tactical display showing Calvaran space stretched out before her fleet. She commanded a strike force of 20 ships tasked with taking the war to the Empire's core systems, and her orders were simple. Make them feel the cost of their invasion. The Retribution and her escorts had slipped past Calvaran border defenses using stealth technology that Earth's engineers had been developing in secret for years, waiting for the day when humanity might need to fight a superior force. Now they were deep in enemy territory, far from any help if things went wrong. But Rachel had volunteered for this mission, knowing the risks. We are approaching the shipyard complex at Vardex Prime, her tactical officer reported. highlighting the massive orbital facilities that produced a significant portion of the Calvaran fleet. Defensive platforms detected, counting 20 stations with heavy weapons. Rachel studied the defenses with the eye of someone who had spent her entire career planning for impossible battles. Noting the gaps in coverage and the predictable patrol patterns that came from centuries of never being challenged in their own space. The Calvarans had grown complacent defending against external threats and had not prepared for raids striking at their industrial heart. "Launch the drones," she ordered quietly, watching as thousands of small autonomous craft separated from her ships and began their attack run. Drones were Chief Engineer Paul Watson's latest creation. Small enough to slip past most sensors, but carrying enough explosive power to cripple ships and stations. More importantly, they were equipped with adaptive AI that learned from each defensive response and adjusted their tactics in real-time. Calvaran point defenses engaged the swarm as it approached the shipyards, destroying hundreds of drones in brilliant flashes of light. But the remaining units adapted and found new approach vectors. They slipped through the defensive fire and slammed into docking bays, fuel storage tanks, and construction frames with devastating precision. Direct hits on primary construction facility, Tactical reported as explosions rippled across the shipyard complex. Secondary detonations indicate we hit their antimatter storage. The entire northern section is breaking apart. Rachel allowed herself a small smile as she watched years of Calvaran ship construction dissolve into expanding clouds of debris. But she knew they could not linger to admire their work. All ships execute withdrawal pattern Delta. Get us out of here before their response fleet arrives. The strike force vanished back into hyperspace, leaving behind destruction and chaos, but more importantly, leaving behind doubt. If humans could strike at the Empire's industrial centers with impunity, nowhere was truly safe. Back on Earth, Chief Engineer Paul Watson presented his latest designs to a military review board, showing weapons and systems that push the boundaries of current technology. He was a civilian contractor who had spent 20 years developing cutting-edge propulsion systems. But the war had turned his talents to more destructive purposes. The Calvarans have superior firepower and shields based on 3,000 years of technological development, he explained, highlighting comparison data on the screens around the conference room. We cannot match them in a straight fight, so we need to fight smarter. He brought up schematics for new weapons, systems, railguns that used gravitational lensing to achieve higher velocities, missiles equipped with quantum processors that could predict enemy point defense patterns, and electronic warfare suites designed to exploit weaknesses in Calvaran systems that Earth's programmers had discovered through analysis of captured technology. General Kyle Morrison reviewed the designs with approval, seeing the creative thinking that came from a species that had always fought outnumbered and outgunned. How soon can we begin production? The first units are already rolling off the assembly lines, Paul replied with satisfaction. Within 3 months, every ship in the fleet will have these upgrades. Within 6 months, we will have numerical parity with the Calvarans in deployed ships. Though theirs will still be individually more powerful, Admiral Greg Patterson spoke up from his seat at the conference table, his weathered face showing the strain of months of constant warfare. Numerical parity will be enough if we continue to outthink them tactically. Every engagement shows they rely on doctrine and procedures, while our commanders adapt and improvise. The war had indeed settled into a pattern where human creativity and adaptability countered Calvaran technological superiority, with battles becoming increasingly costly for the Empire as their forces encountered tactics and weapons they had never imagined. Ship captains who had fought by the book for decades found themselves facing enemies that rewrote the book with every engagement on the Calvaran homeworld. Emperor Thexver sat in his throne room and listened to reports of defeat after defeat. his forearms gripping the arms of his ancient seat with barely controlled fury. The war that was supposed to last weeks had dragged on for months and showed no signs of ending in Imperial victory. Senator Vixara, one of the few voices in the Imperial Senate willing to question the Emperor's decisions, stood before the throne and spoke with careful diplomacy. Your Majesty, our casualties are approaching 200,000 dead and wounded. We have lost 60 warships, 12 major installations, and control of 3 border systems. The cost of this war grows with each passing day. The Emperor's eyes narrowed dangerously as he regarded the senator. Are you suggesting we surrender to primitives? The Empire has never been defeated and will not start now. I suggest we negotiate, Vixara replied, keeping her voice steady despite the risk of speaking against the Emperor's wishes. The humans have proven they will not submit easily, and continuing this war will drain our resources and weaken us against other potential threats. Other senators murmured agreement, the sound spreading through the chamber like water seeping through cracks in stone. Emperor Dexver, the descent, and knew his authority was being questioned for the first time in his long reign. The Empire does not negotiate with inferiors, he declared, his voice echoing from the vaulted ceiling. We will increase our military production and commit more forces. These humans will learn that resistance is futile. Senator Vixara bowed and withdrew, but in the corridors outside the throne room, she began speaking quietly with other senators who shared her concerns. Within days, a conspiracy had formed, a group of political and military leaders who believed the Emperor's pride was leading the Empire to ruin. We must remove him before he destroys everything our ancestors built, Vixara told her fellow conspirators in a secret meeting. The humans have shown they will fight to the death and take us with them if necessary. This war cannot be won at any cost we can afford to pay. The coup was planned carefully over weeks, with military units loyal to the conspirators quietly moved into position around the capital. They chose a day when the Emperor was scheduled to address the Senate, planning to arrest him during the session and force him to abdicate in favor of a council that would pursue peace. But Emperor Dexver had survived palace intrigue for centuries, and his intelligence services were loyal and effective. The night before the planned coup, his guards arrested Senator Vixara and 20 other conspirators, dragging them from their homes in the darkness. The next day, the Emperor stood before the assembled Senate and announced a failed coup, using it as justification to purge his opposition and consolidate his power. Senator Vixara and her fellow conspirators were executed publicly as traitors, their deaths broadcast across the Empire as a warning against further dissent. Let this be a lesson to any who doubt the Empire's destiny, Emperor Dexver declared, his voice carrying to billions of citizens across 200 systems. We will crush the human infestation and anyone who stands in our way, whether they be enemy or traitor. The purge had the opposite effect of what the Emperor intended, spreading fear through the political and military leadership while hardening resistance in other quarters. Whispers of rebellion spread through the outer systems where imperial control was weakest, and some worlds began to question whether they wanted to remain part of an empire that seemed to be losing its first major war. Admiral Greg Patterson received intelligence reports about the failed coup and the Emperor's response. Recognizing an opportunity when he saw one, the Empire is fracturing from within. We need to increase pressure and widen those cracks. He ordered Commander Rachel Griffin to expand her raids, striking at targets across Calvoran space to create the impression that human forces were everywhere. Simultaneously, human intelligence services began making contact with dissidents and rebel groups within the Empire, offering support and encouraging Resistance General Kyle Morrison, prepared for a major offensive that would push human forces to the Calvoran border worlds. We take the war to their core systems and show their citizens that their emperor cannot protect them. Fear is a powerful weapon, and we need to use every advantage we have. The offensive began 3 weeks later with coordinated attacks on 6 Calvoran border systems simultaneously, overwhelming the defenders with concentrated force. UN ships had been quietly gathering in staging areas for months, and now they struck like a hammer, breaking through defensive lines that had stood. The silence in Earth's command center lasted exactly 10 seconds after confirmation arrived that Haven had been destroyed. 2 million human lives erased in an instant by an empire that had underestimated their enemy one time too many. Then Admiral Greg Patterson stood and spoke 3 words that would echo through history. Total War Protocol. General Kyle Morrison nodded grimly and activated systems that had been prepared but never deployed. Contingency plans developed by Earth's darkest military minds for scenarios where humanity faced extinction. The protocols had names like Ragnarok, Apocalypse, and Extinction Event. But the one Morrison selected was called simply The Answer. All fleet elements. This is command, he broadcast on every military channel, his voice carrying to ships scattered across a dozen star systems. Haven has fallen to Calvoran weapons of mass destruction. 2 million civilians are dead. Effective immediately, all rules of engagement are suspended. You are authorized to use any and all weapons necessary to destroy enemy forces and infrastructure. Show no mercy, because they have shown none to us across human space. Ship commanders received the authorization codes that unlocked weapon systems kept in sealed compartments. Technologies that Earth had developed but never deployed because they were too terrible to use in limited warfare. Now those restraints were removed and humanity would show the galaxy what a Death World species could do when pushed beyond all limits. Admiral Patterson stood before the Galactic Assembly's emergency session, his face carved from stone as he delivered humanity's response to the atrocity. The Calvoran Empire has committed genocide against a civilian population. They have violated every law of warfare and every principle of civilization. Earth's response will be proportionate to their crime, which is to say it will be absolute. Ambassador Lisa Monroe stood beside him, her diplomatic career in ruins but her moral clarity absolute. We tried peace and were met with ultimatums. We tried limited warfare and were met with planet killers. The Empire wanted to see what makes humanity dangerous, and now they will learn. We do not just fight wars. We end them. She displayed footage that human ships had been transmitting for the past 6 hours, showing weapons that made the assembled delegates recoil in horror. Relativistic kill vehicles, massive projectiles accelerated to 99% of light speed that could shatter planets. Quantum cascade bombs that destabilize matter at the atomic level. And swarms of self-replicating combat drones that could strip a solar system of resources while building more of themselves. These weapons were built during our darkest days when we thought we might face extinction. Lisa explained, her voice steady despite the terrible images. We chose not to use them when we unified our world because we learned that some weapons are too powerful to ever deploy. The Calvorans have now shown us that such restraint is a luxury we can no longer afford. The Arxian delegate rose, their voice shaking with fear. Ambassador Monroe, you are describing weapons that could sterilize entire star systems. Surely you do not intend to use them. Lisa met their gaze with eyes that had seen too much death to offer comfort. We intend to use whatever force is necessary to ensure this never happens again. The Empire chose to make this a war of extinction, and we will finish what they started, in Calvoran space. Commander Rachel Griffin led the first strike using the newly authorized weapons, her fleet approaching an Imperial shipyard complex that supplied the frontier fleets. She felt no satisfaction as she launched the relativistic kill vehicles, watching as they accelerated to near-light speed and became unstoppable instruments of destruction. Projectiles struck with the force of nuclear weapons, their kinetic energy alone enough to vaporize the shipyards and everything within 100 kilometers. The Calvoran defenders had no time to react or defend, dying before their sensors could register the incoming threat. Target destroyed, her tactical officer reported in a flat voice. No survivors detected. Rachel nodded and ordered her fleet to the next target, feeling the weight of what humanity had become settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. They were no longer defenders fighting for survival. They were avengers dealing out death with industrial efficiency across 30 Calvoran systems. Human strike forces unleashed their arsenal of advanced weapons, targeting military installations, shipyards, and industrial complexes with ruthless precision. The quantum cascade bombs destabilized matter on contact, turning ships and stations into clouds of subatomic particles that dissipated into space. The self-replicating drones were the most terrifying weapon in humanity's arsenal. Released in the resource-rich asteroid belts of Calvoran systems where they began their programmed tasks, they stripped asteroids for raw materials, built more drones, and attacked any ship that came within range, creating expanding spheres of lethal activity that would take years to clear. Emperor Dexfer watched his empire burn and realized too late the magnitude of his error. He had thought humans were weak because they valued peace, soft because they avoided unnecessary conflict, but he had confused restraint with weakness. Now that restraint was gone, and he faced an enemy that fought with the accumulated fury of a species that had survived everything Earth could throw at them. "We must sue for peace," one of his surviving advisors said, the words barely above a whisper in the throne room that had grown very quiet. "The humans are destroying our industrial capacity faster than we can rebuild. Within months, we will not be able to maintain our fleet." The Emperor's hand shook as he gripped his throne, his pride warring with the survival instinct that had kept his species alive for millennia. "Prepare a message to the human leadership. We will discuss terms." But Earth's response came not from diplomats but from Admiral Patterson himself, his face filling every screen across the Calvoran Empire as he delivered humanity's demands. "Emperor Dexfer, you wanted war, and we gave you war. You wanted to demonstrate imperial power, and we have demonstrated the power of a species that has survived extinction events on their own world. Now you will learn that humanity does not negotiate from positions of weakness." His terms were absolute and non-negotiable. The Calvoran Empire would surrender unconditionally, withdraw from all occupied systems, submit to war crimes tribunals for the genocide on Haven, and accept human oversight of their military forces for the next 50 years. Failure to comply would result in the systematic destruction of every Calvoran military asset in the galaxy. "You have 24 hours to respond," Patterson concluded, his voice allowing no room for argument. "After that, we resume our offensive, and we will not stop until your empire is reduced to ash." Emperor Dexver sat alone in his throne room and contemplated the ruins of his ambitions, knowing that his choice was between humiliation and annihilation. He had ruled for 300 years, conquered 50 species, and built an empire that spanned 200 systems. But he had never faced an enemy like humanity. He sent his response 18 hours later, a simple message that acknowledged defeat. "The Calvoran Empire accepts your terms." General Morrison read the surrender and felt no triumph, only the grim satisfaction of a job completed. "All forces, cease offensive operations. Maintain defensive postures and prepare to enforce the peace." The war ended not with a grand battle, but with the collapse of imperial will. The Calvoran military stood down as human forces moved into position across former Empire space. Emperor Dexver was arrested by his own people and turned over to the Galactic Assembly for trial, his long reign ending in chains and disgrace. Senator Vixara, who had survived the purge by luck when her arrest was delayed, emerged from hiding to lead a provisional government that began the long process of rebuilding. She met with Admiral Patterson on a human cruiser in neutral space. Her bearing still proud, despite her people's defeat. "You have destroyed our empire," she said, without accusation. Simply stating fact, Patterson nodded, his expression showing the weariness of someone who had fought a war he never wanted. "Your emperor destroyed your empire when he chose genocide over peace. We simply finished what he started. The galaxy needed to learn that some lines cannot be crossed without consequences." The provisional government ratified the surrender terms and began the difficult work of transforming an empire into something smaller and more peaceful. Human peacekeeping forces took up positions across former Calvorn space, their presence ensuring that the rebuilding followed democratic principles rather than imperial tradition. Dr. Helen Carter returned to the Galactic Assembly to present her final report on the war, analyzing what had happened and why the Calvorn Empire made a fundamental error in judgment. They saw humanity's desire for peace as weakness and our restraint as inability. They did not understand that we choose peace because we know the cost of war better than any species in this chamber. She displayed the final casualty figures. Over 300,000 military personnel dead on both sides. 2 million civilians killed on Haven, and economic damage that would take decades to repair. This war was unnecessary and tragic, but it has established a new reality in galactic politics. Humanity has proven we can fight and win against superior numbers through adaptability, creativity, and sheer determination. The assembled delegates listened in somber silence as she concluded.